Hey everybody, how are you guys doing? Hope you guys are doing okay. I'm Eric Airlock, and this is another talk on philosophy, Germany, Germania, and Nietzsche, the great mustachioed one of my favorite of the modern European philosophers. He ain't perfect. He has a lot of controversial opinions and a most controversial mustache. I will do a little bit during all of this of Nietzsche versus Marx, beard versus mustache, which is technically Marx versus Nietzsche, yes. But objective versus subjective truth, very much the red and black flags a little bit, Marx versus Nietzsche, a little bit of kind of communism, anarchism, socialism, anarchism, a little bit, but less in a political way, more in kind of an epistemological, ontological way. And we'll get all into that a tiny bit. Nietzsche is a most controversial thinker. He does say God is dead and you and I have killed him. And he says that in two of his works, in the mouth of kind of a mad mystic who's clearly Diogenes of sorts. I've seen a German guy wander around and do performance art, wandering around Germany saying, God is dead, where is him? To like weirded out white people in the middle of Germany who are like, who the heck are you in the weird robe, from the Middle Ages. But yeah, effectively, Nietzsche wanted everybody to question a whole lot of everything. He was very much like Kierkegaard, an individualist. He also says there really is, like Kierkegaard says, no real objective truth as much as what truth we make. And rather than saying that Nietzsche was a hard atheist, which he was not, and again, a lot of these guys get accused of atheism, Nietzsche is coming up at a time, and we have seen this in a lot of the other thinkers, where he wants people to question everything Descartes believes in, religion, science, morality, objective truth, very much as Kierkegaard felt it necessary to do, in a very pushing off of Hegel, but the progress of history doesn't stop at German Lutheranism. It keeps going. It looks like it is cultures and forms of life, as Wittgenstein will say, but, as Nietzsche would say, it is individual interpretation, and we, when we're geniuses, break off from the herd, and when we are herd-bound, we are dogmatic and culture-bound as individuals. This is Nietzsche coming along as very much the first Darwinian major European philosopher, coming off of Schopenhauer, and very much like Kierkegaard, saying it is about interpretation and subjectivity, and what subjectivity we can establish through our lives and living on Earth. The cat has fled the position, so I will turn a little bit back over to here. And yes, helps with the camera and the lighting and the stuff. I will turn back to cats as necessary, because cats are indeed a necessity. So I highly recommend reading for Nietzsche on Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, which is an early essay he wrote. It isn't necessarily his later mature thinking, but it is an early statement that's kind of hilarious and amazing. And then Beyond Good and Evil is usually the Nietzsche that I teach people. It is controversial. He wants us all to question all of our beliefs. And when he says God is dead and you and I killed him, what he means very much is that in the modern world, we see truth and meaning go by and get chopped up so much, increasingly, which is why his thinking and people being influenced by him, surrealists are very Nietzschean, and other things. I will have a lot of time to make films about how Nietzsche art, this or that piece of art is in later videos that I won't make for this class right now. But Nietzsche is massively influential, as are Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard, in being a romantic, pessimistic strain that doesn't hate life, but wants life to rejuvenate itself in the face of modern times, being very industrial, which is also Marx. But whereas Marx with the beard says we need to turn to objectivity, politics, and science, and we need to make that objective as a post-Hegelian thinker, Nietzsche with the mustache goes a very different route. He actually, against Marx and objectivity, and decently so, although Marx is very much at the same time, and Nietzsche is pushing off socialists in France and other things. Nietzsche is very into French thought, thinks Germany is stupid, likes a lot of French stuff, likes some German stuff. Very much mocks his fellow Germans and knows that his fellow Germans are becoming increasingly pro-Germanic nationalism, and says this is all crap, let's be more like the French in order to freak out the squares. Basically, Nietzsche versus Marx, very much mustache versus beard. I have both, so I am qualified now. This is the first time I've ever lectured on Nietzsche, actually, with a mustache of my own, which makes me rather symmetrical and qualified, again, to comment on such matters. That when you think about, like, with Antifa and the red and black flags is very much a sort of open call to the left, whether you're kind of more socialist or more anarchist across the board, they're crossed over, come on in, left wing, just very loosely, I think is what the Antifa symbol means, and I'm just going to leave that right there without getting more into it. Nietzsche is a very anarchistic thinker, but he is very much also, a libertarian, writing angry letters to the editor. Now it's, of course, tweeting and or just screaming online in many different media forms, of course. But he is an outspoken individualist. Like Kierkegaard, he says, don't believe in the objectivity of science, religion, politics. It's all human practices of power, not real, not the dream of a demon. That science and religion are the exercise, the demons, are the exercise of power and apes. Why aren't we more Darwinian and real about this? And Nietzsche kind of pines for the polyistic days when I could speak purdy. Nietzsche very much wants humanity to almost go back to he is a romantic and he's very proto-existential. Existentialism is the machine is horrifying. Postmodernism is more, the machine's horrifying, but what are you going to do? Ha ha. Very Andy Warhol. I have in the image Nietzsche in several different colors, which is a mock Andy Warhol that he never actually printed, I'm pretty sure. That many Nietzsche's a la Warhol is more postmodern, cynical, but hilarious cynical, whereas Nietzsche is very much worried that we're not noble enough, us Germans, like the Greeks. Notice how Hegelian this still is, even as he reacts against Hegel. We're not noble enough, really, as individuals, and Nietzsche, like Edgar Allan Poe, and I haven't yet done my videos on Poe or his detective stories, which are actually pre-Nietzsche and very Nietzsche. In fact, I was happy as heck. I have been very obsessed with Poe's detective stories and how they matter for logic, and I will get all into that. It's the proto-Sherlock Holmes stuff. But Poe, like Nietzsche, thinks soak up everything, science, math, art, and be a rich, living human being. Don't be anti-science or anti-math. Be both, as Poe says, the poet and the mathematician, but definitely for Poe and Nietzsche both. But be very sure that this is very human and all kinds of mixed up, and their sorts of thinking is very much the pessimism, either all too cynical or positively, grinning and bearing it, that you find very popular in the modern world, for better or worse, as often say, like it or lump it. So, Nietzsche is very similar to Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard. He is very much a pessimist, and very much a German or Germanic, forgive me, the Kierkegaard and the Danes, of a pessimist. He is somebody who, again, Danish Lutherans, he is somebody who wants people to be a bit bummed out, or is bummed out, or feels that we are all losing meaning and purpose in the modern world somewhat, and wants us to, in a certain sense, if history is not really changing humanity, to get into what is true about humanity in a new way. So in that sense, it's not pessimistic, sad about everything. It is worried and fretful about what all this is, as we all are living life. So and like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche is a very individualistic thinker. He's somebody who wants to push the subjectivism of somebody like Kierkegaard very, very far, and trusts that this was, like Kierkegaard, Jesus and Socrates. He also looks at Jesus and Socrates and says, we're not talking about the most conformist guys here. That if you look at the end, Nietzsche had a very wonderful, rich understanding when he was a boy of Confucius, Muhammad, and Nietzsche for the rest of his life really, and that's why he has Zarathustra. Thus spoke Zarathustra, the original Persian prophet, possibly what Nietzsche believes, very much the first monotheist to establish monotheism in history, is one of the two people in the works of Nietzsche who says, now I realize God is dead and you and I have killed him, in the beginning of Thus spoke Zarathustra, and then goes through a whole lot of trials and tribulations. A lot of people read the beginning, I do, of Thus spoke Zarathustra and get lost midway through. He very much has him declare God is dead, but as I have read before on Good Works on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, then he keeps going in a lot of ways. We will talk about that. But Nietzsche loves Confucius, loves Muhammad, loves Zarathustra, loves Jesus, loves Socrates, thinks Paul is some kind of jerk. As I already mentioned with Kierkegaard, Nietzsche says, be like Jesus, not like Paul, be a rock star and incredible. And then the herd follows you, is very much Nietzsche. It's that what happens is actually what dominates human beings. There is a moment in waking life where Linklater running around and talking to people in Austin, Texas, manically, which is what Linklater does on film a lot, it seems. Although, of course, his I don't know what we call it, film has matured or something. I don't even know if that's a thing. But him running around Austin, Texas and Slacker and then and Waking Life and stuff, it's that one of the people says it, who's very a Nietzschean older guy who is ranting about humanity and how silly we all are and stupid. And it's a very Nietzschean, cynical, pessimistic rant. And he ends it very much with the thought, which is very wonderful. It's like he's interviewing a Nietzschean. I imagine this is almost an instructor in Nietzsche of his, and he's interviewing him at a home, it could easily be. And the guy says, it depends what matters. What is worse in humanity, fear or laziness, is what he says. That's a very Nietzsche thought. I won't get deep into exactly that right here, but that we're such cowards, and the few of us who rise up against our own cowardice we always have and do something amazing are the creative types. Remember, Schopenhauer kind of wants you to melt back into opera. It doesn't really necessarily say write the best opera as much as melt into the art and the spirit and the humanity, which would honestly, for Nietzsche, leave a lot of us very passive. So for Nietzsche, you stand up. You don't melt into the opera. You create the weirdest Burning Man style boat and create the weird hippie party or do something crazy, whatever you want to do, whether social or not. And you do that. Nietzsche loved taking long walks in the mountains. Like Zeno the Stoic, he definitely didn't like people all that much or hanging out so much with people. Neither did Kierkegaard. Went around being happy with people, but he definitely liked walking alone a lot. Kant kept his mouth closed. A lot of these people, again, walk around to stimulate thinking. Nietzsche more walked up in the mountains. Again, I do like to tell this Zen story. There's a simple Zen story. I believe it's Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, from that collection in English, is monk goes up the mountain, gets wonderfully enlightened, comes down to the marketplace, somebody elbows him, gets pissed off. The end. You know, it's like, well, maybe enlightenment can sometimes cynically be temporary. Nietzsche likes to walk up in the mountains, and he says his wisdom is in his nostrils, whether or not he kept his mouth closed like Kant. He is very much versus Kant and Marx. Nietzsche is against objective truth. He is against pride in science or religion claiming or law. Think about how it's, again, everybody likes law. Nobody, plenty of people do not like cops. A lot of people don't like lawyers, and no one enjoys a judge, do they? Not so much when it's you in the docket. So given the koan case or not, Nietzsche is very much, isn't it funny how since Sumer people like law and not judges so much and cops? Well, that would be very much the cynical Nietzschean perspective. And guess what? If you sing you rap a rap song or sing a rock song about it, again, as the terrible joke goes, I wrote a song about a tortilla. Well, it's more of a rap, grandfather, dad jokes. It's, again, I'll grandfather that in and never speak of this again. But yes, as the stupid jokes go, Nietzsche very much, and he is fun to read compared to other philosophers, believes we should cynically and humorously mock all of this because how proud should we be of science? One of the ways I always like to emphasize, this is not anti-science or anti-vaccines. Be careful with that, of course. But this is cynically looking at science, and I love this perspective, I must admit. Coming from hippie land, it's like, but how proud should science be more than the Hopi using some state of technology? And that's very much hitting you in the funny bone here with that kind of thing. I understand, but water is safe or not in Flint, Michigan, isn't it? With all the industry. So the thing is, before we say, oh no, we make the water safe, but what if we're not, there's things going on right now I won't speak so much of. But again, how civilized has civilization be? How much is science for the public good? And that is all Nietzsche too, very much Feyerabend, Latour, a lot of modern thinkers who are often shunned because they basically only say, I must say again and again, science is human. Nietzsche says we're human, all too human. As long as you understand that what this lecture is very much about is Nietzsche saying God is dead and you and I have killed him means science and religion, we can increasingly see historically, have not been simply objective. This reminds me again of cynically mentioning, and it angers me a little, that feminist theorists, and I consider myself an ally of feminism, but not the expert at all, or of any of the positions, that feminist theorists go to philosophers of science sometimes and are philosophers of science and say science has benefited men more than women sometimes. And the men are like, oh, little ladies, math can't be biased. Look at this. Look at this answer, always the same. See, math isn't biased. It's like, but the whole setup could easily be caring more about the ancient Greek philosopher Testicles, more than what's over easy, So, yeah, I mean, with all of that, that's easy enough to say without saying it, isn't it? But then it's like, oh, math can't lie. It's like, when have you seen math alone in a room and trusted it with your wallet? I have cats I do not trust with the toys that I have clearly given them myself. And they're making noises, which again is against the emperor and my central authority. Anyway, we won't do anything peripheral, again, nor jokes. I shall use no art at all in being this silly person. So Nietzsche, of course, is one of the great people, speaking of which, is that instead of thinking about the objectivity of science, why not understand human meaning is the music. In science, the meaning, art, philosophy, all of it, and the sciences can be scientific, all that's what it is, and that's great. But is it good or evil? This is very much with Nietzsche, again, always teach beyond good and evil, and another title of his work is Human All Too Human. So what are science, religion, politics? Increasingly and cynically embracing it with modern humor and art. What is it, and why do people like Nietzsche and find him historically interesting? Because he says this is all beyond just good or evil, and it's human all too human. And that is what he thought of religion. I studied the history of religion, very much somewhat inspired by Nietzsche. I don't think he's a perfect guy. I don't like all of his views. But I studied the history of religion myself to give myself a broader view for just this kind of reason. Religion has been human very much. Science has been human very much since Sumer. The Greeks really didn't invent it. It's been around. It's done everything. So if we are saying, well, Western science is what? It's not China. Like, there's weird ways here where are we talking about good science or bad? As I like to mention, it may be very much that no American knows right now how much we're making helicopters or not. Just nobody knows that, because nobody's in a position to ever tally that up or do that. It also reminds of Adam Curtis, the British documentarian. I hope I'm getting his name right. Oven has... Cat has a toy. Is that he does mention in the Soviet Union, instead of making money, it's like most amount of productivity to show off in certain metrics. So there was just stuff being shipped to and from Siberia, massive trains of stuff, just because it looked good on paper and it didn't benefit anybody anything mostly, plenty of the time. This happened a lot because of how you tally it up. So it's like, wow, the stock market's doing great. It's like if people are starving, those metrics look amazing. That can happen here in capitalism or over in hard socialism in the Soviet Union, plenty. I think they're still around. So yeah, whether or not we ship this much or that much over quantitatively to Siberia, we can all mock plenty of the large systems of life without me taking sides and say, wow, isn't it human, all too human? And then of course people point and say it's Muslims and communists who don't let you say that, not us. We're all free to be you and me. Of course, that's why I like pushing the Nietzsche angle, honestly, is that we are a bit free and there's a bit open space here, not just good or bad, but there are ways where this culture is a bit more open, we can more speak freely, but that actually is the hard one and people need to keep pushing lots of different ways, not just obscenity in front of everybody freaking out the squares. But the freedom to think how you want to and live how you want to is something that is hard won, slow, and steady, and unfortunately does have to do with primal human fears and apes. And we are the craziest of apes, according to Nietzsche, of course, and we are the ape that outapes the ape. And that's very Bataille, but we're not going to speak of him until later here. I will do a whole separate talk on Bataille. He does deserve to be mentioned and talked out, especially if you like art and obscenity and the history of that. And people all like lots of stuff on Netflix. You probably need to know who Nietzsche and then specifically Bataille are, which I didn't know who Bataille was until grad school. But knowing some Bataille, you know a little bit more about surrealism, obscenity, and what kind of art, both serious art and humor, people like nowadays. Which again, I like trying to be somebody informed and creative. So if you want to do art serious or silly, knowing Nietzsche and Bataille is really, I would say, good for you, especially when it comes to punching up. Both Nietzsche and Bataille, I have to say, as an anti-racist, both of them, Nietzsche and Bataille, men of their time, both believed in saying that they were effectively anti-racist. Nietzsche says he is an anti-Semite. I don't think he says he is an anti-racist, but he does say anti-Semite and is concerned with those kind of things being of his time. Later, Bataille, in the face of the Nazis, as they are going to take over Paris, says never befriend a racist, and says that, in his words, while he may or may not have been trying to commit willful and happy human sacrifices and write the most obscene of art that gets City Light books shut down by the cops in the 50s with the beatniks in San Francisco, where I'm from. Because selling people Bataille is a little bit of what gets City Lights shut down and what gets the most censorship ever at all. Like Democrats and Republicans in the 90s wanting rap lyrics censored or not, which again, I'll get all into as we go along. But if any of this is interesting and if any of this is dangerous, and again, as Wonder Chosen says, thinking is dangerous, but danger can be fun, kids. Nietzsche and Bataille are some of the more anarchistic, dangerous thinkers who actually really are like, we're just standing for individuality. We are not telling you to not believe in God. We're telling you to believe in all kinds of gods is effectively what they are saying. And Bataille gets really weirdly into that. Very into the whole mystical, whole religion thing from a kind of proto-hippie, be way out there in the weirdest art films perspective. So I can understand if a lot of people don't like that plenty and that isn't everybody's cup of tea. I have to fast forward through plenty in art films a lot, I got to tell you. Much love. But with the low attention span I have for this or that, Nietzsche and other thinkers who follow him very much make rebellion and individuality very central to their positions, and we've been walking closer to that this whole time. And denouncing the hypocrisy of science and religion posing off like they're great, I tell you lovingly in the day where I don't want people to question vaccines. I think those are good and happy in people's lives, but I also follow that up with, and it's a very Nietzschean and Feyerabend point to make, Feyerabian? People don't talk much of him, honestly, is that while we're creating making vaccines, and I think those work like heck, remember we don't feed or house the poor of the world, and that creates very serious problems. And here, it is no answer one way or the other. Let me quickly say let's then vaccinate or not vaccinate people. That is an evil kind of, not final solution. It's like, what is that Scottish essay of a practical solution to the problem? No. That sounds very genocidal. It's like to just be like, oh, we don't feed and house people, let's not vaccinate people. But just remember, we haven't simply been, vaccines work like heck, I think. Science hasn't really been a plan to help everyone equally. I do like to point out we've spent more on entertainment in China, Islam, and then Europe and American CGI as a species. And then on planes way more, and ships with bombs than we have actually fed all the people and cared about the hobos. So the nearly dead, as I heard, what was that from? Is that I heard from in a video, and I think it was a Scottish or an Irish YouTuber who said I think it's an Irish YouTuber. Who said the nearly dead as the homeless. It was like, that's cool. It's terrifying, but it's cool. In the same way that's cool in industry, and it's more to Dickensian London. Charles Dickens is coming along, inspiring Poe and others to look at the city as a horrifying thing to orphans and widows and tearjerker, oh no. And that is beautiful and brilliant, and it's like really industrialized men are weeping while reading about children and orphans and be like, whoa man, I'm getting all romantic and stuff. As surreal art, as you can walk through everywhere, I do love to mention, it's like men read Jane Austen novels and are like, I never realized women had feelings like this. It's like, that's amazing, isn't it? Like, that's very much Nietzsche. It's like, we can stand up to all of this. Like, you don't have to, and he does not mean I'm hardcore. As I often mention, a lot of times people think this is like, I'm hardcore into science or atheism or something, therefore don't be your religion and that God is dead. No. It's well beyond that. It is that Christians believe God is dead and you and I killed him because that's traditional Christianity, and he knows that from being 5 generations deep of a minister's kid. Like, people think they killed Jesus. Jesus was God. Therefore, all of this is what it is. He's just telling people, ironically, don't you think, a bunch of stuff that he thinks is funny to freak out the squares with, knowing that we all do, and great geniuses did throughout history, question the religion of their day. Jesus, the Pharisees. Nietzsche's all about it. Don't be Paul, be like Jesus. Question the Pharisees. Here, if it sounds like I'm actually don't trust vaccines or don't trust Pharisees or not, Nietzsche knows, as he believes in being a rock star, or thinks that you should be more of a rock star individualist, and I say rock star, he didn't know what a rock star was, is that as we're doing this, YouTube or what have you, is that selling out or is that not rock star YouTubing or what have you? Those are issues for later Nietzschean thinkers. As we get more and more virtual with Baudrillard, can we even be individual anymore with the internet? And I think we can be. Otherwise, I'm not on here telling you things. But that Baudrillard is very much a French Nietzschean, who's also very inspired by and a mainstreamer for French thought of Bataille and rupture and splurts of things, and I will explain that later with Bataille. But again, if you want your thinking to kind of be dangerous and artistic and freaking out and punching up in all different sorts of directions, I teach whole classrooms of diverse people. I do not tell you to have your traditions or not. I do not tell you to believe in scientific objectivity or not. I do highly encourage you to realize belief does not change people very much. Overall, people lie, cheat, and steal on paper, almost as if culture makes, and literacy, math, make no difference in human behavior at all. If that sinks in nice and deep, and I do want people to watch Amazonians on YouTube, then there is a great amount of hypocrisy we can all mock in science, religion, art, politics, because we are the herd, and this is just break out of the herd mentality. Now, with a bunch of internet stuff today, of course, that could sound deeply ironic and interesting, and it just should be openly and dangerously, because now American individualism and a bunch of traditionalism all blended is making a bunch of people believe possibly in conspiracy theories and a lot of thinking that they're going to say, see, I'm pushing against the herd. Right now, we definitely have, with people talking about conspiracy theories a lot, sheeple, I do love, I should mention, and I often do, don't be a sheep is very much a Nietzsche thought. XKCD, the awesome Stickman internet comic, did have there's a guy being like, wake up, sheeple, and yelling through a bullhorn. He's an activist. He's like, you people are all asleep. Wake up, sheeple. And then the ground shakes, earthquake. And then up comes Stick, giant sheep, and is like, now is our time to rise. And then Stick lady with hair runs in. She's like, why did you wake up the sheeple? He's like, I don't know. So here, notice that's actually very postmodern. It's very Nietzsche cynical, but then it's mocking the cynicism. It's like, but what are you going to do? If you wake up the sheeple, everything's just terrible. It's very much like the ending to, I think it's Cabin Fever, or not Cabin Fever, the Cabin in the Woods. Yes, is very much kind of the ending. I mean, not ruin the ending entirely. So, yeah, it is very much just sort of cynicism about how terrible all this is. There's a lot of negativity about that kind of cynicism and open-endedness nowadays, that it's suicidal. It actually is all the range of human emotions and the happy, positive, cynical embrace. I think that's very much the younger generation. And unfortunately, Nietzsche, through Baudrillard and somewhat the death of meaning, and if modern times are killing meaning, is very important thinking people need to wrestle back and forth with. That's what I do. And I oftentimes tell people Baudrillard, they're like, meaning isn't dying. It's like, what if it could be in some ways and we need to struggle against it? This is very good for Americans. It's so American. I grew up in the 80s and 90s to be like into individualism, into not being a sheep, and then I'll just ask you to look at the right or the left or anything you disagree with, and you tell me if just saying I'm not a sheep is simply freeing people. So cynically, of course, and Nietzsche doesn't want you to just be a Nietzschean and follow him, or that he has a school, everybody is that. Nietzsche's massively influential on people because they just have to be cynical about politics and religion a whole bunch nowadays. It's just what the game has shifted to, and Nietzsche is, in this positive way, a man of his times, which here doesn't mean so clearly racist, although again he has views of his times decently, as a guy who proudly declares himself an anti-Semite and says, I'm having all the anti-Semites shot in the years before the Nazis, some of whom considered him an inspiration. Sadly, and we will get into that and the back and forth of that. As Nietzsche was going insane, he says, I'm having all the anti-Semites shot against the wall as God Emperor, or something like that, as he goes nuts. Unfortunately, a bit like his dad. I'm going to break these Nietzsche talks into a couple of them, as I was planning on doing. I usually rant off script about Nietzsche a lot, because actually Nietzsche is one of the first thinkers, before Derrida and Judith Butler, to say philosophy is very much a performance. Deleuze and Guattari, as later French thinkers say, were taking flights, and they're very much thinking of Nietzsche as French guys. Nietzsche very much takes flights in his thinking. He's like, listen to this rant. He's very much a stand-up comedian of thinkers. Cornel West, the most famous of African-American, Black American, I was almost going to say comedian, philosopher, knows very well that he openly says jazz comedians, Black American comedians, are doing something like performance and thinking out loud and just with it. Ned Flanders' dad, Lousy Beatnik, says, does anybody tell, the jazz bongo guy not to go boom, boom, ba bap, bap, bap? And it's like, you are your own rule. You are your own life, man. It's very beatnik. It's very against the system, and to be yourself. And that kind of thing is overly mocked, of course, and all of this, and we know all of that plenty. It's very American to be very much intertwined with all of this stuff, whether you like it or not, because that's been culture very hip in the 50s, 60s, 70s, onward, to be a bit Nietzschean, whether or not you know you're doing that. And it's not like he invented individualism, and he is thus very much speaking for that. He's saying what we're all thinking. Nietzsche is very much saying, but if I've read a lot of history and if I like Confucius and Muhammad, what the heck do I believe in now? Modern science? What if I'm reading about thousands of years of history and I see science primarily go to war and then also agriculture? Again, always have to joke, like the sci-fi novel title, Gun with Occasional Music. What am I supposed to believe? The progress of science is just good? I think it's human. Now what? And we have to positively embrace that rather than just sink into the opera with Schopenhauer. That is Nietzsche in a ranty nutshell. And as I was saying, ranting about Nietzsche openly without looking so much at the notes. I haven't even gotten much through the first paragraph of the notes. And then I scrolly past a bunch of stuff. And the class is like trying to look at it manically on the website. I find teaching on the website projected in front of people kind of nice. They can follow along. Until then I scroll past all of the Nietzsche notes because I've already ranted. Sort of, I kind of did that. I don't know. Because I just get on a, soapbox a long time ago. Person I got actually my Berkeley City College job somewhat in ways through, because person talking to person, She mentioned a long time ago, she was like, this is the thinker I stand. She asked a talk full of people. She's like, and who, that this is the sort of thinker. She was doing a quiz at the beginning of a philosophy talk. It's like, this is the sort of thinker I would stand up on a soapbox whenever I start talking about. And everybody sort of was embarrassed to say, and I was thinking, and she's like, Nietzsche, It's like, yeah, Nietzsche is kind of the one you would stand on a soapbox and start screaming at people about. More than anybody else, kind of Kierkegaard. Decently Schopenhauer, but he's a bit Kantian, and he likes poodles. Nietzsche is rant against the editor of everything. It does remind me very much. Nietzsche weirdly is more Heraclitus. He doesn't necessarily like the Greek skeptics so much. At least they don't seem to figure in most of his writings. I looked that up on purpose because I was like, he would be so into Greek skepticism. Actually, he's more into Heraclitus and the fire of Heraclitus, and he says that. But the Greek skeptics, Sextus Empiricus has against the mathematicians, against the philosophers, against the astronomers, against the physicians, against the this, against the... Nietzsche very much comes off similarly, like, let me tell you all of the... it again, like Zen Master Joshu of Tong, China, that a student comes up to one of the greatest Zen masters ever 1,000 years ago and says, what's the true meaning of Buddhism? And Joshu's like, is there anything else you don't like? This guy. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff Nietzsche does not like. And he thinks Buddhism is too passive. He did not, sadly. I wish Nietzsche had read the Joshu. I am almost certain he did not, or have anything like the opportunity. I got to buy the text in the late 90s, mid-90s or something. But basically, Nietzsche's the kind of guy who loves to rant and rave about everything and thinks that's useful rather than building systems like Kant or Hegel as a German philosopher following Kant and Hegel historically. So ranty art philosophy, whether or not it's a system, putting a weird piece of art in front of people and saying it's a philosophical thing, is very popular in the spirit of Nietzsche, Bataille, and others who follow all of this. We're very much going to go Nietzsche. I'll give you a bit of Bataille, which is a little out of step, but Bataille is, in fact, maybe what I will do is actually do Heidegger first, finish the Germans, pretty much, and then go and do Bataille after Heidegger, because actually doing Bataille after Heidegger might be more appropriate now that I think about it, and I usually include Bataille with Nietzsche and then do Heidegger. But now that I'm actually thinking about it, especially given the Kojève and the Ted Cruz and the talks and all of that, given, and see the, again, Hegel talks and the final one, the part 3, that, and at the end, that it would be good to do Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger, actually finish the Germans off and then do Bataille. So that's what we're going to do. Again, ranty time, no order. We're just winging this. I don't know any of these people, What do I know and why would you pay for it? What kind of public education is this? So essentially, Hegel, Nietzsche, and Heidegger are 3 thinkers you should probably know something about. Why? Because just knowing the barest basics of Hegel, Nietzsche, and Heidegger, and then how their thinking influenced this or that French dude, and people's, unsung women's, etc., vive la sad de France, that actually, long live it still, it would seem sad, is that these are the Germans who influenced the French, and those are the hip thinking still. So yeah, it's like knowing some Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger, also knowing that Americans are scared of everything German after World War I and II, both. 1-2 punch with that. So also, most white Americans are Germanics, not Brits, genetically, 23andMe tells us, trying to tell the white people, knock, knock, knock. And Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger are big German ideas like them. They're Mozart's or the Beethoven, I don't know, is it? That Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger are the heavy-hitting Germans who then lead to French postmodernism, existentialism, post-structuralism, postmodernism. So knowing some Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger ideas, them's good eating. You know what I mean? It's like, that's good for you. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to stop this talk because I've already ranted for a half hour. I'm going to break this talk up into chunks. And smaller chunks and smaller rants about all of that so that I can make these Nietzsche ideas more accessible. I'm going to go into his life in the next talk and talk out some of his life and his first work, The Birth of Tragedy, and how civilizations, like the Greeks, are not just drawn towards order, but lust for both order and chaos, effectively, as sort of primordial drives, which is very Schopenhauer, proto-Freud. We're going to cover a bit of Nietzsche's tragic life. I have been reading good biographies of Nietzsche in the last few years that are mentioning his complicated but interesting relationships with women. Nietzsche, in his early thinking, was very misogynistic. And then he increasingly was like, but I keep meeting individual people who are so amazing. And hopefully, as a dude of his time, was not only an anti-racist, but as somebody who did clearly put down a great deal of misogyny quite openly in his Untimely Meditations, a early work of his. Definitely then was constantly meeting individuals who were just the intellectuals wandering around trying to seek, his audience and others. And as somebody who hung out with a Jewish friend and a female friend quite a bit, and a bit lovingly and tragically, all of that was stuff that influenced Nietzsche to think, wow, we're all such human individuals, and I can hang out with such individual people of all walks of life. I really should be something like an anti-racist and an anti-nationalist in that I am very libertarian. Of course, whether or not libertarians are anti-nationalist or not is a very interesting American issue right now, which I will table right the heck here. But Nietzsche is somebody who's very libertarian anarchistic, must say, says don't trust any systems. They are power. They're not fake. Religion and science are real. They're actual real use of real things and people in the real world. Learn your history, kids. Learn about it and understand that this is all humanity like heck. Now, Nietzsche says a lot of things I do not like, and he knows he says a lot of things that he does and does not like himself. He was a very honest, brutal thinker, and whether or not you like him, he wants you to like and not like him, and he is very much an inspiration for art. You could say, like Cornel West, he is effectively, and Cornel West knows his German and French thinkers, that's what Cornel West is doing as a black American philosopher. Very much. He openly is doing that. So if you want to know Cornel West, you got to know your core Germans and then your core French people. Just listening to the his opening rant in the taxi of Examined Life. It's on YouTube, the opening scene. You'll hear about Heidegger and Nietzsche from his mouth. Is that he says I'm a blues man, and he knows it's like it's stand-up comedy, it's blues, it's jazz, it's just letting yourself go and being that genius or that great, interesting person. Nietzsche, unfortunately, says, as the stand-up comedian, and again, he says that a great thinker has earned the right to be wrong, which hopefully doesn't mean go out and break the eggs, comrade, on purpose, but means we accept the horrible in those who are wonderful, sadly and tragically. As Groucho Marx more lovingly put it hilariously in such a spirit, it's like behind every great man stands a great woman, and behind her stands his wife. Which, of course, the joke would be that great men ain't so great, are they? Hilariously enough, sad tragedy. Yes, roll, and then up again with the happy times. So, yeah. Nietzsche is a bit misogynistic openly. He obviously does say things of his time that could easily be seen as culturally supremacist and racist, but he was a staunch individualist, and he did, as biographies have, I do like I Am Dynamite, and I recommend that book. As recent biographies have shown, he had a very complex and interesting, and that book is written by a female author, I think it's a fantastic book, that you would find a lot of interesting books written about Nietzsche. Nietzsche's very inspiring, and what a complex and interesting life the guy lived, and how much he was trying to be cutting edge, avant-garde, very into French stuff for a German of his time, and saw a world coming in which people would have to be more like him, whether they liked it or not. And he thought that was for better or worse. All of that was a huge inspiration to not only Germans, and unfortunately Heidegger, who was a card-carrying Nazi plenty, but then French post-war anti-communist, bunch of art, bunch of, surrealism is technically plenty before World War II, and then after also. Bunch of people who do not like fascism, bunch of people who do like freedom, bunch of people who do like the cutting edge of art. All of them have been very, very heavily influenced by Nietzsche and thinkers who are very into Nietzsche. You can very much say modern thought is pre and post Kant, like Greek thought is, according to Whitehead, pre-Plato and then post-Plato. You can say continental thought is not just that the analytic continental divide is very pre-Hegel, is very Kant, not Kant, post-Kant, or not so much post-Kant with neo-Kantian analytic thought. You could definitely say another watershed here is after Hegel, which is very continental thought, we're leaving reason for more the romantic after Hegel and going full Darwin and Nietzsche on the continent. That is very, very much, if you want to know the hip German and French thoughts as a white American or otherwise, this culture, which as Anglophonics, we do ignore somewhat the German and the French culture. That's post-war. That's a lot of stuff. French thought is fancy. German thought, German, French, even Japanese stuff, super hip, super awesome. This is the roots of all of that stuff. This is understanding a lot of the art and the spirit all around you since the 60s and otherwise. So that is an intro rant. That's a good intro. Who Nietzsche is, what the heck is he doing overall, kind of flight. Again, we're taking flights of reason, a la Deleuze and Guattari. and post-Freudian, post-Marxist French thought. Beard versus mustache. I am thus going to title this somewhat Beard versus Mustache, Nietzsche versus Objective Truth, and that with all of this, we are then going to have Nietzsche's life and his Apollinian Dionysian order and chaos, and then we will be moving into speaking a bit of Thus Spoke and Sprachen about the Zarathustras. So, the Zoroaster, the Zarathustra, Gesundheit. Much love, much happiness, much craziness of life. Again, as the Chinese curse saying goes, may you live in interesting times if you're a Nietzschean, because life should be terrible and it could only be wonderful thus. As Heraclitus says, Nietzsche's favorite ancient Greek philosopher, if a pig does not know peace, a pig does not know peace if a pig does not know war. Much love, much happiness. Please make some love, not war, in ways legal in your state. And I will see ya, if I ever see ya.